I cannot believe they did this. This is completely unacceptable and against everything we agreed upon. This is the proof. You've been embezzling the HOA funds for years.
What?
How dare you accuse us of this?
I never thought a year away could change everything. I left my home thinking life would go on like it always had. I had some family to visit out of state, work obligations that couldn't wait, and I assumed my little neighborhood would stay normal. But I was wrong. From the moment I drove back down my familiar streets, I knew something was off. The houses looked taller, the lawns sharper, the fences different. My heart sank. I slowed the car, and my eyes went straight to what used to be my backyard. There they were, massive mansions practically built over my property. My property, the place I had cared for, maintained for years, walked through every morning with my coffee in hand. And now, it felt like someone had taken a part of my life and just replaced it with something that didn't belong to me. I parked my car and stepped out slowly. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining it. Maybe it was just the angle, the landscaping, but no. Every step I took confirmed it. They had built right over the boundaries I had set, over the exact corner where I had planted my garden, where my kids used to play. I couldn't believe it. The HOA had done this. They'd ignored every agreement, every rule, every signed document I'd meticulously followed. All those notices, those emails, those polite letters I'd sent over the years gone. Trampled, as if they had no meaning. My hand shook a little. I wanted to shout, but I didn't. I needed to think. I needed to breathe. The HOA had always been difficult. Petty, some would say. I've fought them before on small things, garden decorations, paint colors, minor violations. But this was on another level. This was my property. And now, strangers were living on it, building on it, claiming it. I walked slowly along what was left of my yard. My eyes traced the new fences, new gates, everything, encroaching on the land I called mine. I remembered every corner, every tree, every little stone I had placed perfectly. And now nothing. I pulled out my phone and opened the old survey maps I kept on my cloud storage. I had never thought I'd need them. But now, looking at the layout, the measurements, the clear boundaries, I felt a small spark of hope. There was proof. Hard evidence that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. The property was mine. Legally, officially, undeniably mine. But before I could do anything, I needed to observe. I watched from the street as people came and went from the new buildings. Contractors, workers, new homeowners? I couldn't tell. Everyone acted normal, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. And then I saw her, the HOA president, or at least the woman I had seen at countless meetings. Her expression was exactly what I expected, smug. She saw me standing there, my eyes locked on her, and I could practically see the thought in her head. She's gone. She's not coming back. Nothing to worry about. I swallowed hard. She didn't know I was back. She didn't know I had seen everything. But most importantly, she didn't know I had proof. Secret proof. The kind of proof that could expose everything, bring all their lies to light, and finally make them accountable. I walked slowly back to my car, heart racing, mind spinning. I needed a plan. I couldn't just storm in, yelling, waving my hands, or threatening them. They were organized. They had papers, signatures, rules. Everything in their favor, except for the one thing they couldn't control. Me and my secret. I parked a little down the street, hidden behind a hedge, and took a deep breath. Memories of this place flooded back. Lazy summer afternoons, barbecues with neighbors, the little swing I had built for my kids. It wasn't just land. It wasn't just property. It was my life, my memories. And now, someone else was living it as if it had always belonged to them. I thought about what I could do next. I needed evidence of their wrongdoing. Not just the proof I already had, but something fresh, something undeniable. Photographs, videos, documentation of the construction encroaching on my property. Everything would be used later. I had to be careful. The HOA was not forgiving. They were strategic, ruthless in their own way. As I watched, I noticed small details that made my blood boil. They had destroyed trees I planted, leveled small hills I'd spent months shaping, removed fences I had installed to mark boundaries. Every action screamed disrespect. Every action screamed, we can do whatever we want, and you can't stop us. I knew that wasn't true. I knew I had options. Legal options, but more than that, options they couldn't even imagine. They didn't know the full story. They didn't know I'd kept every email, every letter, every map, every conversation logged. I had been meticulous. I had prepared for small battles before, but I had never imagined the war that was coming. Then, just as I was about to leave and plan my next move, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the cloud storage. The old survey maps, the old emails, all neatly organized. I stared at the screen and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Confidence. A calm, steady certainty that this wasn't over, that I wasn't powerless. I walked back to my car, sat down, and made a promise to myself. I would reclaim what was mine. Slowly, strategically, and with every rule, every document, every ounce of proof on my side. They thought they could take my property. They thought I wouldn't return. But I was back. And this time, I wouldn't just watch. I would fight, and I would win. For the rest of the day, I drove slowly around the neighborhood, observing every new building, every new fence, every HOA sign. I took notes, photos, mental snapshots of everything. I didn't want to rush into confrontation. I wanted precision. I wanted undeniable evidence. And most importantly, I wanted to make sure that when the time came, the world would see the truth. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. I parked once more in front of what used to be my front yard and took a deep breath. I remembered how this place looked a year ago, peaceful, familiar mine. And now it was a battlefield. I didn't know exactly how the next few days would go. I didn't know how the HOA would react when they realized I wasn't gone, when they saw that I had proof of every rule they had broken. But one thing was certain. The secret I had held onto for so long was about to change everything. And as I sat there, watching the mansions that had been built on my land, a slow, determined smile crossed my face. The HOA had made a mistake. They had underestimated me. They had forgotten one important thing. Truth and evidence are stronger than arrogance and power. The war was about to begin, and I was ready. The next morning, I woke up with one thought on repeat. I needed proof. Not just the maps and documents I already had, but something fresh, undeniable, something that would leave the HOA scrambling. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and laid out every single piece of paper I had saved over the years. Survey maps, emails, HOA notices, letters confirming approvals, each one a tiny weapon. For years, I had kept them thinking they might never matter, thinking my little neighborhood battles would remain small. But now they were everything. I decided to start documenting the new construction. My phone camera was ready. I drove slowly along the streets bordering my property, taking pictures and videos of the mansions. Every inch they had encroached, every tree they had cut down, every fence they had removed, I captured it all. I wanted a timeline, a visual record. If the HOA tried to deny it, I would have proof. As I walked around, I noticed small things that made me angrier by the second. They had ignored setbacks required by law. Some of the structures extended beyond the approved property lines. Contractors were still working in areas that should have remained untouched. I could see foundations dug where my old garden had been. My hands shook a little, not from fear, but from anger and determination. I realized I needed more than pictures. I needed witnesses, people who could attest to what had been there before. I called my neighbor across the street, a quiet man who had always been friendly but stayed out of HOA politics. "You remember my garden, right? The fence line?" I asked. He nodded. "I saw them start building last month. They didn't even notify you? They overstepped the boundary." His voice was firm, confirming exactly what I needed. With that, I knew I wasn't alone. Others had seen it. Others could confirm the HOA's violations. I made a note to speak with a few more neighbors later. But first, the secret proof, the thing I had kept hidden. I went to my safe, tucked away in the corner of my study. Inside was a folder labeled property proof. I opened it carefully. Inside were old survey maps, blueprints, signed approvals, and copies of every email I had ever sent to the HOA requesting confirmation of boundaries. Most people wouldn't bother keeping all this, but I had, and now it was my strongest weapon. I studied the maps carefully, comparing them with my photos of the new constructions. Every line, every measurement, every corner, I could show beyond doubt that the HOA had built on my land. My heart raced as I realized just how much I had in my hands. They had assumed arrogance and ignorance would protect them. They were wrong. Next, I thought about the confrontation. I didn't want to rush and unprepared. The HOA was organized, bureaucratic, and ruthless in its own way. If I didn't go in with every piece of evidence lined up, they could twist the story, confuse the issue, and delay justice. I needed a plan, step by step. I spent hours drafting notes, timelines, and organizing my evidence. Each email, each map, each photo was labeled. I wanted to present a case so clear, so undeniable, that even the most stubborn HOA member couldn't argue against it. My mind replayed countless HOA meetings I had attended over the years. Their smug expressions, their condescending tones, their sense of power. I could feel it all again. But this time it wouldn't work. Not anymore. By the afternoon, I decided to visit the neighborhood office. I didn't go in, of course. Not yet. I stayed in my car, taking note of who came in and out, watching the flow of traffic, and observing the behavior of the HOA staff. I even took a few photos from a distance. Every small detail might become important. Patterns, timelines, behavior, all could support my case. That evening, I met with a few trusted neighbors who had witnessed the construction. We spoke quietly on their front porches, away from prying eyes. They told me exactly what had happened. Deliveries of construction materials at odd hours, workers digging without permits, signs of property damage. Each story added to my growing mountain of proof. I also realized something crucial. The HOA had underestimated me not just because I had been away, but because they thought I was passive. That arrogance would be their undoing. They had no idea I had meticulously documented every interaction, every rule, every approval. They had no idea I was ready. Over the next few days, I worked quietly, gathering more evidence. I visited the city records office to confirm property lines officially. I took more photos of the encroachments from multiple angles. I even made diagrams overlaying my old property maps with images of the new construction. It was meticulous, painstaking work, but it had to be perfect. Late one night, sitting at my dining table with all my documents spread out, I felt a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. The pieces were falling into place. I could see the confrontation in my mind, the moment I would lay the evidence out and watch the HOA scramble, trying to defend the indefensible. But there was one more thing I had to do. I needed to prepare for them to deny everything. HOAs are masters of deflection. They'd say I was mistaken, that the lines had changed, that approvals had been granted. I had to anticipate their excuses and have answers ready for each one. My maps, emails, witness statements, they all had to be airtight. The next morning, I made a list of everything I would need for the confrontation. My folder of secret proof, my phone with photos and videos, copies of city property records, witness statements, and a detailed timeline. I even rehearsed how I would present everything, step by step. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. HOAs rarely back down without a fight. But I also knew something else. Truth is powerful. Evidence is stronger than arrogance. And patience can be a weapon if wielded carefully. By the end of the week, I felt ready. Every detail, every moment of observation, every piece of proof, it was all in place. The secret I had held onto for so long was ready to be revealed. The moment of confrontation was near. And as I looked at my old home from the street one last time before the big day, I felt a strange calm. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about respect, justice, and proving that no one could trample over what was yours without consequences. The HOA had no idea what was coming. And soon, they would learn that I wasn't someone to be ignored, overlooked, or underestimated. The day had finally come. I could feel it from the moment I woke up. My stomach churned with nerves, but beneath it was something stronger, determination. I had prepared for this moment for days. Weeks, really. Every photo, every map, every email, every witness statement. It all led to this confrontation. I dressed carefully in something simple but professional. I didn't want to look like I was here to fight, but I wanted to look confident, calm, and prepared. The last thing I needed was to give the HOA even a shred of doubt that I could be shaken. I drove slowly toward the HOA office, clutching my folder of secret proof tightly. My mind ran through every possible scenario. What if they denied everything? What if they tried to intimidate me? I had anticipated these reactions, rehearsed my responses, and lined up all my evidence. I wasn't going to be caught off guard. When I arrived, I noticed the usual smug expressions. The HOA staff were sitting at their desks, chatting casually as if nothing had happened. I could feel their eyes on me, watching, sizing me up. I walked in slowly, keeping my head high, and approached the front desk. "I'm here regarding the new constructions on my property," I said, voice calm but firm. "I need to speak with the HOA president." The woman behind the desk raised an eyebrow. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her tone condescending. I placed my folder on the counter. "No appointment. This is urgent. You've built on my land without permission, and I have proof." She glanced at the folder, smirked slightly, and said, "We'll see about that." I was led to a small meeting room. As I entered, the HOA president was already there, sitting confidently behind a large desk, arms crossed, smirk firmly in place. "Well, well," she said. "I see you've returned. What is this about?" I took a deep breath and laid my folder on the desk. "This," I said simply, "is why you can't just take what isn't yours." I opened the folder and began showing my evidence. Maps, property lines, emails confirming boundaries, approvals for landscaping. Everything was meticulously organized. I explained each point slowly, clearly, so there could be no confusion. The president's face changed slightly as she glanced at the maps. I could see the first flicker of doubt. I continued, showing photographs of the mansions encroaching on my property. I had time-stamped videos of construction in progress, workers moving materials past my property lines, even neighbor statements confirming everything. By now, a few other HOA members had entered the room. Their smirks had faded, replaced by something else: concern, nervousness, a subtle panic. I kept talking, pointing out every violation, every rule they had ignored, every document proving their arrogance and carelessness. "This," I said, "is not just about property. It's about rules, agreements, respect. You ignored all of it, and now the consequences are yours." The room was silent except for the shuffling of papers and the occasional murmur from an anxious HOA member. I could feel the tension rising. I was calm, but the energy in the room was electric. I could see the realization forming on their faces. They had underestimated me. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, the revelation of the secret proof. I pulled out a set of documents I had kept tucked away. Older survey maps, notarized documents, emails that no one had expected me to have. These were not just proof. They were irrefutable evidence, the kind that left no room for argument. I laid them carefully on the table, spreading them so everyone could see. "You thought you could build here without consequences," I said. "You thought I wouldn't notice. But here is the truth." The HOA president leaned back, stunned. Her smug expression had completely vanished. She tried to speak, but I continued, showing emails where approvals had been confirmed, highlighting the areas they had encroached, and pointing out the clear violations of every rule they were supposed to follow. It was like watching a house of cards collapse. Each piece of evidence I revealed seemed to crush another layer of their confidence. They fumbled for words, tried to argue, but every point they made was immediately countered by clear, documented proof. I could see the panic in their eyes. This was not going how they had planned. The room, once filled with arrogance, was now heavy with tension and disbelief. They had underestimated me. They had assumed absence meant weakness. They had assumed I would never come back. But here I was, and I was stronger than ever. After what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 30 minutes, I leaned back and let the weight of the evidence sink in. The room was quiet except for the occasional shuffling of papers. Finally, the president spoke, her voice lower, lacking confidence. I didn't realize. I interrupted gently but firmly. "You didn't follow the rules. You ignored boundaries, and now you must correct it. This is not negotiation, it's fact. You can't argue with proof. I had anticipated their attempts to delay or deflect. I had my responses ready. Every excuse they offered was countered by documents, photos, and witness statements. It was methodical, careful, and deliberate. I wasn't just proving a point, I was reclaiming what was mine. By the end of the meeting, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The HOA members, once confident and dismissive, were now quiet, subdued, clearly realizing the magnitude of their mistake. They had thought they could overpower me with bureaucracy and arrogance, but truth and evidence were stronger than their power plays. As I gathered my folder and prepared to leave, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The confrontation had gone exactly as I had hoped. I had stayed calm, focused, and precise. I had shown them that arrogance has limits, and that ignoring rules has consequences. Walking out of the office, I felt lighter than I had in months. I had faced the intimidating power of the HOA, revealed the secret proof, and exposed the truth. But more than that, I had set the stage for what came next, reclaiming my property and ensuring that justice was finally served. For the first time since my return, I felt a sense of victory, though I knew the process wasn't fully over. There would be follow-up, corrections, and probably resistance. But the hardest step, the exposure of their wrongdoing, was complete. And now, the HOA had no choice but to acknowledge the truth. The secret proof had done its job. The arrogance of the HOA had been shattered, and the path toward reclaiming what was mine was finally clear. After the confrontation at the HOA office, I felt a mix of relief and anticipation. Relief because the secret proof had done its work. Anticipation because the real challenge wasn't over yet. The HOA couldn't undo what they had done with words alone. They would have to take action. And I needed to make sure that action actually restored what was mine. The next morning, I drove back to my property. I wanted to see the situation with fresh eyes, to assess exactly what needed to be corrected. As I walked along the lot, I could see the initial panic from the previous day had faded from the HOA members. But now, there was no denying the truth. Contractors and workers were waiting nervously, unsure what would happen next. I called my lawyer, not to escalate, but to ensure everything would be handled properly. My lawyer reviewed all the documentation I had gathered, the maps, emails, photos, witness statements, and timestamp videos. He nodded with approval. "You've covered every angle," he said. "They can't argue with this. The only way forward is to correct it." With legal backing, I scheduled a formal site inspection with the city's property office. An inspector arrived, and we walked the entire property together. Every boundary violation, every unauthorized structure, every encroachment was documented officially. Photographs were taken, and reports were filed. It was satisfying to see the reality of the situation officially recognized. The HOA had no choice but to comply. Over the next few weeks, the HOA scrambled. They sent letters, attempted internal meetings, and even tried to negotiate alternate solutions. But with my evidence, legal support, and city documentation, there was nothing they could do. Every argument they made was countered by fact. Every attempt to delay was met with another documented proof. Slowly, grudgingly, they began to comply. Workers were called in to remove structures that had been built illegally. Fences were reconstructed along proper boundaries. Trees and landscaping that had been destroyed were replanted. The property began to look like it had before the HOA's interference. I spent hours walking through every inch, checking measurements, documenting the corrections. The satisfaction of seeing my land restored was immense. Neighbors who had been watching from a distance came up to me. Some shook my hand, others simply smiled. "We couldn't believe you had all that proof," one neighbor said. "You really showed them." I nodded, quietly proud. The validation from people who had witnessed the events unfold made the victory feel even sweeter. It wasn't just about property anymore. It was about respect. It was about showing that rules, agreements, and truth matter. The HOA had thought they could intimidate me, silence me, and rewrite reality to suit their desires. But they had underestimated patience, preparation, and perseverance. They had underestimated me. By the end of the month, everything was officially corrected. The city confirmed all boundaries were restored. Any illegal construction had been removed or adjusted. My property was officially mine, just as it had been before I left. And more importantly, the HOA had learned a lesson. Ignoring rules, trampling boundaries, and underestimating a homeowner with proof and determination would have consequences. I stood in my yard one afternoon, looking around at what had been restored. The fences were back in place. My garden, freshly replanted, was starting to bloom again. The old swing where my children had played hung perfectly between two trees. Everything felt right again. I could feel the weight that had been on my shoulders for months finally lift. And then, something unexpected happened. The HOA president, once so smug, approached me. She didn't say much, only a quiet, "I see now. You were right." There was no apology, no excuse, just acknowledgement. And for me, that was enough. Recognition from the person who had caused so much chaos was a small but satisfying victory. I realized that the entire experience had taught me more than I could have imagined. I had learned the importance of preparation, the power of documentation, and the strength that comes from standing up for what is right. I had also learned patience. Justice doesn't always come quickly, but when it does, it's deeply satisfying. Weeks later, life began to return to normal. I spent time in my restored yard, enjoying small victories like morning coffee on the porch and watching the neighborhood go about its day. I smiled when I saw children playing, neighbors chatting, and the quiet beauty of my property once again intact. I knew the HOA wouldn't forget this lesson anytime soon, and I knew I had proven something to myself as well, that no amount of intimidation or power could take away what was mine if I was prepared to fight for it. Looking back, it all felt surreal. A year away had seemed harmless, but it nearly cost me everything. Yet, through patience, careful planning, and the power of undeniable proof, I had reclaimed my property. The HOA had been exposed, the rules had been enforced, and justice had been served. As I stood in my yard that evening, the sun setting over the restored neighborhood, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I had fought, I had endured, and I had won. My property was mine again, not just legally, but emotionally, spiritually. The secret proof had blown them away, and it had restored more than just land. It had restored a sense of control, of respect, and of victory over arrogance and deceit. And in that moment, I realized sometimes justice is slow, but when it comes, it's perfect.